You don't wake up motivated every day. Let's start with that truth. Waiting to feel inspired before you act is a luxury you can't afford if you're trying to do something meaningful with your life. The people who show up every day, who lead, who create, who grow, don't rely on motivation. They rely on something far more consistent, a trained mind, a disciplined mindset, a system of thinking that is ready to respond regardless of the weather, the mood, or the fear. So let's talk about what it actually takes to train your mind to show up, especially on the days when you least feel like it. It starts with understanding a basic principle: consistency is not about perfection, it's about identity. When you train your mind to show up, you're not just building a habit, you're reinforcing who you are. Every time you act in alignment with your goals, your brain says, this is me, this is what I do. That's how trust in self is built, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet daily decision to show up. Now, of course, the problem is that life gets in the way. We're tired, we're anxious, we get distracted. That's why training your mind is like training a muscle. It doesn't grow stronger through theory. It grows stronger through reps. That means you need friction. You need to go through resistance and push through it anyway. And one of the most important ways to train your mind is to remove the decision-making process from your daily discipline. Decision fatigue kills more dreams than lack of talent ever will. If you're asking yourself every morning, should I do this today? You've already lost half the battle. You need to shift the default. This is not a choice, it's a standard. Just like brushing your teeth isn't negotiable, neither is showing up for your work, your growth, your purpose. Let's be honest. There will be days you won't see results. You'll question yourself. You'll wonder if it's even worth it. That's where most people quit. That's where most people make the mistake of associating their worth with their results. But training your mind means divorcing your commitment from the outcome. If you're only consistent when things are going well, then you're not really committed. You're just entertained. Real growth comes from learning how to act without applause, how to show up without a spotlight, how to train your thoughts to follow a path of discipline even when no one's watching. That's not glamorous, but it's powerful. That's what builds something sustainable. And more importantly, that's what builds you. And here's something to remember: your mind will believe whatever you tell it most often. If you constantly say, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not capable, your mind will listen. But if you train it with words of intention, identity, and direction, I do hard things, I finish what I start, I show up anyway, it will rise to meet you there. You don't have to feel brave to take a brave action. You don't have to feel confident to act with confidence. You just have to show up. And if you do that enough times, the feelings will follow. Too many people are waiting for clarity, waiting for confidence, waiting for the right moment. But showing up is how you create those things, not the other way around. Your mind is not your enemy, but it will default to comfort if you don't challenge it daily. So challenge it, push it, train it, and above all, lead it. Because when your mind knows who's in charge, when it's trained to obey the mission instead of the mood, there's very little you can't accomplish. 5 keynotes of the speech: consistency is built through identity, not emotion. Showing up reinforces who you are. Discipline grows like a muscle. It requires repetition, resistance, and intentional training. Removing daily decision-making builds reliability. Habits become non-negotiable. Commitment must be separated from results. Real progress is built without applause. Your mind reflects what you feed it. Train it daily to obey direction, not distraction. Most people think consistency is about routine or willpower. They think it's about setting a schedule, checking off boxes, and forcing themselves to keep going. But the truth is, consistency is much deeper than that. It's not just a behavior. It's an identity. The reason some people keep showing up while others fall off isn't because they're stronger or more disciplined. It's because they've decided at a core level who they are. And that decision shapes everything. When you begin to shift your perspective from, I need to do this, to, this is what I do, you're no longer relying on fleeting emotions. You're operating from a sense of self. That's the real anchor. Because feelings change, circumstances change, but identity stays consistent. If you believe you're the kind of person who honors their commitments, then showing up stops being an optional task. It becomes a reflection of your character. You're not chasing motivation anymore. You're expressing who you are. Let's say you're training for something, a new job, a fitness goal, a project you've been dreaming about. In the beginning, it's easy to feel excited. New goals come with a surge of energy. But what happens when that wears off? Most people start negotiating with themselves. They tell themselves, I'll skip today, but I'll make up for it tomorrow. That's when identity hasn't kicked in yet. Because when you identify as someone who shows up regardless of how they feel, there's no internal negotiation. It's already decided. Training your mind to show up daily starts with how you speak to yourself. Every time you say, I'm not a morning person, or I'm just not disciplined, you reinforce that identity. Your brain listens, it responds. But when you change the narrative, when you begin saying, I'm someone who follows through, or I keep promises to myself, your mind adapts to that belief. You're not faking it, you're reinforcing it. Consistency is less about pressure and more about alignment. When your actions align with your self-image, they feel natural, not forced. And this doesn't mean you won't have hard days. It means that even on hard days, you know who you are. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need to feel 100%. You just need to remember, this is what I do. This is who I am. Think about anyone who has ever accomplished something significant. They didn't just wake up every day full of drive. They had bad days, setbacks, doubts, but their identity carried them. It wasn't about whether they felt like it. It was about being the kind of person who kept showing up. This mindset shift takes time. It's not overnight, but it starts with small choices. Each time you choose to show up, especially when it's hard, you're proving something to yourself. You're casting a vote for the person you want to become. Over time, those votes add up. And suddenly, consistency doesn't feel like a battle anymore. It becomes a rhythm. You start to trust yourself. That's when momentum builds, not because life got easier, but because your foundation got stronger. Many people struggle because they're still chasing external rewards. They want the results to validate their effort. But real consistency comes when the act itself is rewarding. When showing up becomes part of your identity, you don't need applause to keep going. You don't need a gold star. The act of honoring who you are is enough. That internal alignment, that sense of integrity is the fuel. This also means that when you slip up, you don't spiral. You don't label yourself a failure. You understand that missing a day or getting off track doesn't change who you are. The identity is still intact. You simply return to it. That's what consistent people do. They don't aim for perfection. They aim for loyalty to themselves. So if you want to train your mind to show up every day, stop trying to fix your behavior in isolation. Start by reshaping the way you see yourself. Start telling a different story, not just with words, but with actions. Each day you show up, even a small way, you reinforce that story. Over time, it becomes unshakable. And when identity drives behavior, consistency becomes automatic. You're not forcing yourself to show up. You're just doing what people like you do. Discipline is not something you're born with. It's something you build. And like any muscle, it requires training. Most people treat discipline as if it should come naturally, as if those who show up every day simply have more willpower. But that's not the case. The difference lies in repetition, in developing internal strength by repeatedly pushing through resistance. The more you train yourself to act regardless of how you feel, the stronger that muscle becomes. It's not magic, it's mechanics. You put in the reps, you get the results. Think of any skill you've developed in life, whether it's learning to play an instrument, drive a car, or speak a new language. You got better by doing it over and over. At first, it was uncomfortable. You were awkward. You made mistakes, but you kept practicing. Eventually, your brain and body adjusted. That's exactly how discipline works. It's a skill forged in discomfort and strengthened through repetition. You show up, you struggle, and you repeat. Slowly, you start to move through resistance more easily, not because the resistance disappears, but because you become stronger than it. And here's the part people often overlook. Discipline doesn't just grow when things are going well. It grows best when you're tired, unmotivated, uncertain. That's when the real work happens. When you train your mind to take action under pressure or discomfort, you're conditioning yourself to act independent of mood. That's the difference between amateurs and professionals. Amateurs wait for the right mood. Professionals train themselves to act regardless of it. The key is to stop framing discipline as a punishment. Too many people associate discipline with self-denial or struggle, when in reality it's a form of self-respect. It says, I value my future self enough to make hard choices today. That's powerful. Every time you do something that stretches you, even in a small way, you're reinforcing the belief that you're capable of more. That belief creates momentum. You start trusting yourself to follow through. You start proving to yourself that you can do difficult things, not once, but repeatedly. Training discipline also means accepting that resistance is not a sign that something's wrong. It's actually proof that growth is happening. Resistance shows up right at the edge of your comfort zone, the exact place where transformation begins. When you start lifting heavier weights in the gym, your muscles resist. They tremble, they tear slightly, and then they rebuild stronger. The same happens with your mental habits. The more you train your mind to push through resistance, the more it adapts. Eventually, what used to feel hard becomes your new normal. Discipline thrives on structure. That means building routines and systems that reduce friction. It's about setting up your life in a way that helps you succeed by default. For example, if you want to show up for your goals each day, you need to remove as many obstacles as possible. Lay out your clothes the night before. Turn off distractions. Set time blocks. Every decision you make to support discipline strengthens the pathway in your brain that leads to consistent action. Another truth is that discipline is not about doing everything all at once. It's about starting with one thing and mastering that. People get overwhelmed when they try to overhaul their entire life in a week. But you don't need massive change overnight. You just need one thing you can commit to every day without excuse. That becomes your anchor. From there, you build. One disciplined action leads to another. One choice becomes a habit. One habit becomes a lifestyle. Even failure plays a role in training discipline. You're going to mess up. You're going to have off days. But those moments are not setbacks, they're reps. Every time you fall off and come back stronger, you're conditioning resilience. You're teaching your mind that you don't quit when things go sideways. You reset, you recommit. That's part of the process. And the more times you do that, the more disciplined you become, not just in action, but in mindset. Eventually, you reach a point where discipline is no longer a struggle. It becomes second nature. You don't question whether or not to show up. You just do. because you've trained your mind to value the long term over the short term. You've conditioned yourself to take ownership of your choices. And in doing that, you've built something incredibly rare, the ability to act consistently regardless of circumstances. That is the true strength of a trained mind. One of the biggest reasons people struggle with consistency is because they keep asking themselves the wrong questions every day. Should I do this today? Do I feel like it? Can I skip just once? These questions might seem harmless, but they chip away at your commitment one decision at a time. If you're making room for negotiation, then the discipline hasn't become your standard yet. The truth is, when you want to train your mind to show up every day, you have to remove the space for debate. You need to stop asking whether. It simply becomes a matter of when and how. Think about it this way. Do you wake up each day wondering if you should brush your teeth? Probably not. You don't have a long internal debate about it. You just do it because it's part of who you are. It's not exciting. It's not glamorous, but it's automatic. That's the level of integration you want with your habits and disciplines. The more decision-making you leave to chance or mood, the less likely you are to follow through when things get difficult. Your mind will always take the path of least resistance when it's left with too many options. That's where systems come in. Systems remove the burden of choice. They turn your values into structure. For example, if your goal is to write daily, create a fixed time in your schedule when writing happens no matter what. It's not open for reconsideration. It's already decided. When the time comes, you sit down and begin. If the words don't flow easily, you keep going anyway. If you're tired or uninspired, you still show up. Because the system doesn't rely on how you feel, it relies on what you committed to. What this does is rewire the way your brain approaches discipline. Instead of treating daily action as a series of choices, it becomes a sequence of behaviors. The mind begins to recognize a pattern. You stop wasting mental energy on the back and forth and instead put your focus into execution. That's a major shift. Decision fatigue is real. The more choices you give yourself throughout the day, the harder it becomes to stay on track. That's why people start strong in the morning and lose steam by evening. It's not a willpower issue, it's a structure issue. When you remove daily decision making, you also take control back from your emotions. Because emotions are unstable, they fluctuate based on energy, environment, and dozens of outside influences. But when you create non-negotiables in your routine, you don't need to feel motivated to follow through. The standard has already been set. There's no inner courtroom drama. You don't argue with yourself, you just do what's next. This level of clarity creates freedom. It might sound rigid at first, but it's actually liberating. When you eliminate uncertainty about what needs to happen, your brain can relax and focus. You spend less time thinking and more time doing. And every time you act according to that structure, you reinforce your identity as someone who follows through. That repetition matters. Your confidence grows, not because you achieved something huge, but because you consistently did what you said you would do. Now, this doesn't mean your systems have to be perfect. Life will throw curveballs. There will be days when the schedule gets disrupted. But that's not a reason to throw out the system. It's a reason to refine it. Flexibility can exist within structure. If you miss your usual time window, you adjust and show up later. What matters is that you don't reopen the question of if. That's the part that stays firm. If is already answered, you always show up. That's the baseline. This approach is especially important when motivation runs dry. In the beginning, motivation might push you to start, but eventually motivation fades. That's when your system, your structure, your discipline, these are what carry you. You don't have to rely on inspiration when your actions are grounded in intention and supported by a plan. You stop being reactive and start being intentional. You stop wondering what to do next and instead move with purpose. Training your mind to show up every day isn't about working harder. It's about removing the friction that keeps you from working at all. It's about replacing self-doubt and overthinking with direction and rhythm. It's about turning actions into rituals and rituals into identity. And the more you do that, the less room you leave for excuses, distractions, or emotional detours. What once felt difficult becomes your new normal. And your mind over time learns not just how to act, but how to act without question. Most people tie their consistency and effort to the outcomes they're hoping for. They show up when the results are visible, when the progress is measurable, or when the external feedback feels good. But that kind of conditional commitment is fragile. It's easy to keep going when everything's going your way. It's easy to stay motivated when your effort is being noticed or rewarded. The real test, the one that defines whether your discipline is real, is whether you can keep going even when nothing seems to be happening. When the applause fades, when the progress slows down, when no one is watching, that's when your commitment is truly revealed. Consistency that depends on external validation is not sustainable. Because the truth is, there will be long stretches where the growth is invisible, where the work feels repetitive, where you doubt whether you're moving forward at all. That's where most people give up. They mistake the lack of visible success as a sign that the effort isn't worth it. But that's a misunderstanding of how long-term growth works. Progress often happens quietly. It builds slowly underneath the surface before it ever becomes noticeable. But it only builds if you keep showing up, especially during the silence. When you train your mind to keep going without the comfort of immediate results, you develop a kind of internal durability. You're no longer dependent on the scoreboard. You're focused on the process. You learn to find pride in the act of showing up itself. The discipline becomes its own reward. You stop relying on motivation and you start developing a deeper kind of drive, one that's rooted in integrity, in identity, in a personal standard that doesn't waver based on outcome. This doesn't mean that results don't matter. Of course they do. But they can't be the only thing that drives you, because the results are not always within your control. You can influence them, you can work toward them, but you can't force the timeline. What you can control is the decision to keep showing up. Every day you do that, you're building something far more valuable than a short-term win. You're building trust with yourself. You're telling yourself, I'm the kind of person who stays in the game regardless of what the scoreboard says. That kind of trust is rare, and it's powerful. Because once you know you won't quit on yourself, your confidence stops being fragile. You don't need constant feedback to believe in your path. You start to understand that the most meaningful progress usually happens in silence. Behind closed doors, when no one is clapping, that's where resilience is built. That's where mastery is developed. That's where consistency turns into character. People often assume that high performers are just more talented or more lucky. But in reality, many of them simply stayed consistent longer than others. They were willing to be unseen for a while. They were willing to keep refining their craft even when no one was recognizing them. They stayed focused on the process, not the praise. That's what allowed them to outlast the ones who quit when things got quiet. Showing up without a spotlight isn't weakness, it's strength. It's proof that you're anchored in something deeper than outcome. You're anchored in purpose. Purpose doesn't always feel exciting. Sometimes it just feels like doing the work even when you don't feel like it. It's the quiet repetition of daily effort. The decision to take action without needing permission. The willingness to look like you're going nowhere, all while laying the foundation for something meaningful. This is what separates people who reach their goals from those who don't. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of endurance. There will be moments when you feel invisible. Moments when you wonder if it's worth it. Moments when you question your direction. Those are not signs to stop. They're invitations to dig deeper. To remember why you started. To anchor yourself again in the principle that growth doesn't always announce itself right away. It often whispers before it ever roars. And if you quit when it's whispering, you'll never hear the volume rise. Your consistency has to be stronger than your craving for quick results. Your mind has to be trained to act without applause. Because the reality is, if you only show up when someone's watching, you're not truly committed, you're performing. But when you learn to show up in silence, to stay loyal to the process without needing proof that it's working, you unlock something most people never reach. You become unshakable, not because everything is working perfectly, but because your commitment is no longer negotiable. Your mind is constantly listening. Every thought, every word you say to yourself, every belief you repeat, it all gets absorbed. And the truth is your mind doesn't argue. It accepts what you feed it most often. If you keep telling yourself that you're not good enough, not ready, or not disciplined, your mind will believe that and act accordingly. But if you consistently tell yourself that you're capable, resilient, and committed, your mind starts to reflect that back in your behavior. This is why what you feed your mind matters more than almost anything else when it comes to showing up every day. Most people don't realize how powerful their inner dialogue is. They let their thoughts run on autopilot, repeating the same doubts and fears over and over until those thoughts harden into beliefs. And once a belief is formed, your brain starts filtering the world through that lens. It's not about whether the belief is true. It's about how often it's been repeated. If you constantly say, I always procrastinate, or I never finish what I start, your brain begins to treat that as identity, not just behavior. That's why it becomes harder and harder to break out of those patterns, because they don't feel like habits anymore. They feel like who you are. But identity is flexible. Belief systems can be rewritten. And that process starts with conscious thought. You have to interrupt the automatic negative patterns and replace them with intentional language. Instead of saying, I hope I can do this, say, I am doing this. Instead of saying, I don't know if I'm capable, say, I do hard things. The shift isn't just motivational, it's neurological. When you repeat empowering thoughts regularly, your brain starts to create new connections, reinforcing that new identity. Over time, this becomes your new default. Not because of hype, but because of consistency. Training your mind to show up every day isn't just about building physical routines. It's about mastering your inner narrative, because even the most structured plan can collapse under the weight of toxic self-talk. You could have the perfect schedule, the best intentions, and the right tools, but if your thoughts are working against you, you'll find ways to sabotage your own progress. That's why mental training must happen daily. You don't wait until things fall apart to fix your mindset. You train it ahead of time. You repeat the kind of language you want your mind to obey, even when you don't fully believe it yet. Especially then, the mistake many people make is thinking they need to feel confident before they act confidently. But feelings follow actions. When you speak with clarity, when you think with intention, when you behave in alignment with who you want to become, the feelings eventually catch up. That's how momentum is built. Not by waiting for the perfect mindset to appear, but by feeding your mind the direction it needs to follow over and over until it believes it. This isn't about fake positivity. It's not about ignoring reality or pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's about choosing what thoughts you allow to dominate your thinking. Are you reinforcing doubt or are you reinforcing discipline? Are you repeating the story of your limitations or are you writing the story of your growth? Your mind is a reflection of your focus. Whatever you repeat, you reinforce. And what you reinforce becomes behavior. That behavior becomes habit. That habit becomes character. Even small shifts in language can make a major difference. Changing "I can't" to "I haven't yet." Replacing "this is too hard" with "this is challenging, but I can figure it out." Replacing "I'm not motivated" with "I'm disciplined enough to do it anyway." These subtle rewrites change your emotional relationship with your challenges. They give you a sense of agency, which is critical. When your mind believes you have control, it stops defaulting into excuses and starts searching for solutions. This practice requires repetition, not once, not twice, but daily. Just like your body needs regular training to stay strong, your mind needs consistent input to stay aligned with your goals. That's why feeding your mind is not a one-time act. It's a lifestyle. It's how you think, how you speak, how you respond to obstacles, how you guide your internal dialogue when no one's around. It's quiet work, but it's transformative. Over time, the voice in your head becomes your ally instead of your enemy. And when your inner world is aligned, showing up every day on the outside becomes far easier. Not because life got easier, but because your mind got stronger. The mind, just like the body, must be trained if it's going to serve you in the long run. It won't automatically push you to show up when things are hard, when progress is invisible, or when motivation fades. That's your job, to lead your own mind. And you do that not through force, but through clarity, discipline, and identity. You show up not because you feel like it, but because you've decided that this is who you are. You remove the daily debates, you detach from outcomes, and you speak to yourself with purpose. Over time, your mind stops fighting you and starts following you. And when that shift happens, when your thinking becomes your ally, you no longer need perfect conditions to make progress. You show up every day not to prove something to the world, but to stay aligned with who you've chosen to become. That's the power of a trained mind. And that's how real change begins, quietly, daily, and relentlessly.